let's move on and let's talk about red flag laws because I think we're probably not on the same page on this issue because I have mixed feelings about it. You're hard against it. But first, let's just like run through what this I think we agree on this piece of it. In the Senate package, they're essentially bribing states with federal money to go and pass and implement red flag laws. I think the federal government has no business in this. A federal red flag law is a very bad idea. Most people live hundreds of miles away from the nearest federal courthouse. It the debate needs to happen entirely at the state level, and the feds shouldn't be putting their thumb on the scale one way or other, essentially putting you in the position where if you don't do it, you have to turn up all free, pass on all this cash, basically. So we both don't support this part of that proposal. On the actual underlying thing, red flag laws, for folks who don't know, are essentially laws that are called extreme risk protection orders. And they essentially allow somebody to go to a court locally or petition a judge to have a neighbor, a friend, a spouse, a family member, law enforcement in some cases, to have someone else's guns taken away from them. And they must get that judge and convince them through some standard that this person is a danger to themselves or others based on the basis of what they post on social media, threats they've made, breakdowns they're having, different things. And then the police go and take that person's gun. There's a hearing within a few weeks about whether they should be reinstated or not. And at that hearing, they're allowed to have a lawyer make their own argument. The burden often shifts back to in their favor. They're very controversial, but they're also actually the only thing in this gun control conversation that actually seems like it could at least theoretically stop mass shootings. Because so many of these mass shooters, the warning signs are there for years. The police get tipped off, they threaten on social media, they talk about hurting people, they talk about shooting up a school. So for me, I start as at least open to it, theoretically, because it seems like actually on topic, like it could address the problem in theory, whereas none of the other proposals do. What's your starting point on this issue?
So my starting point actually used to be where you are. When I first heard of these laws, was pretty sympathetic because I work around mental health and I have for some time. And I've often seen people who are in this very hard situation. You know, once somebody is 18, you as a family in most states have practically nothing you can do to stop them. When they are in the throes of psychosis, when they are escalating, when they are becoming violent, you don't have any rights, right? There's really very little you can do. And so I know that's a very scary position for people to be in. And this is a hard, messy topic. And I feel like these laws, I will say, at the very least, feel well-intentioned to me, right? They feel targeted. They do feel like they're actually seeking to address the root cause of the problem. They're not actually going after mass gun control. They're really trying to look at people who actually are displaying symptoms of real violence, which should be the focal point. That being said, over time, I have become very, very wary of these laws. And that's because of my broader work in criminal justice, where I have become convinced that no person should ever have their rights taken away without adequate representation, due process, and a trial. Minimum. I don't care what somebody's accused of. I don't care what we think they've done. Like, those are the minimum thresholds I think should be met before somebody loses their rights in this country. And even with those protections moderately in place, we still have hundreds of thousands of people who have been wrongfully convicted and had their rights stripped away, who've been abused by our system. My primary concern with red flag laws is that they could be used similar to how institutions were used throughout decades of our history, where husbands could have their wives committed with very, little actual evidence, and people could basically have their rights taken away just because they looked scary or were acting in certain ways that people didn't like. I think these things could easily be abused. Most of the flag law proposals I've seen do not have stringent components by which we would measure when somebody should have their guns taken away, when they should have their rights taken away. I think at the very least, if this kind of protocol were put in place, there would need to be a trial. There would need to be a jury. There would need to be a preponderance of evidence. There would need to be beyond a reasonable doubt that this was the case. And even then, I fail to really believe that these laws would do much, because I am convinced that people who are committed to violence will find a way to carry out violence. It doesn't matter if the government takes away their guns. It doesn't matter if the government says they can't buy guns. They will go to a black market. They will steal guns. They will borrow them from a friend, or they will find out another mechanism of carrying out violence, right? There's still many ways people can do horrific things without a gun, as we've seen in multitudes of events. So I feel like the risk for red flag laws, for abuse, and for them to be used against people who are in no way a threat is so much higher than the likelihood that they would actually prevent violence that I have become opposed to them over time.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that, because I agree with you. Those are real risks that can and will happen. But like anything, public policy is about trade-offs. And I was reading up on this before this podcast, and since 2016, California passed a red flag law in 2016. 21 times since then, they've successfully taken away guns from someone who publicly threatened a mass shooting. And in Florida, they passed one, and this is actually a little more concerning. It has been used thousands of times, which gives some more credence to your argument. But those times include a dad who threatened publicly to shoot everyone at his son's school, and a bunch of people who did suicide attempts. And actually, that latter point is where I actually think that red flag laws could potentially do more to reduce suicide than mass shootings or homicide, because I used to believe that gun deaths via suicide were not because of the gun, and they aren't really. However, suicide attempts by gun have a much, much higher completion rate than other forms. So if you were able to take away someone's gun and they still attempted suicide, there's a better chance that if they do a different method, they will survive that attempt and we can get them the help and care they need. So I guess I totally see what you're saying, but I also see opportunity for these laws to make a difference. And what I like about them is that they're actually addressing, or at least attempting to address the problem. They're not punishing people uniformly. Ban guns, raise the age, just black and white. It's people who have actually exhibited the behavior. There's a big difference for me, in theory at least. Categorical restrictions that just hurt everybody, or you did this, so your rights are being suspended.
But you have to understand that in doing that, yes, maybe that's how they structure it. They say that's what they're doing, but how quickly is it going to be where they don't like your politics and you're considered a conspiracy theorist, and then you're put on a red flag list because you're saying things they don't want you to say? Like, these things don't start over here. They always begin in a very small foot in the door kind of way, and that's the wedge that government then uses to come in and greatly expand things and take away your liberties. And so, like, that is my concern with red flag laws. They aren't that tailored. They're never that tailored to just like someone who is, we can prove they're in psychosis, we can prove they're a suicidal threat. That's not really the layer that I've seen in most of these bills. It's more like the family is concerned, people bring forth evidence of threats, etc. So I think, and even with like the school board parents is a good example recently, right? Like the FBI was saying these people are domestic terrorists, are making threats. Well, some of the threats were things like people saying they wanted to like tear down the government. Is that really a threat? Like, I mean, a lot of people feel that way. So that's my concern with it. I do think you're correct, though, as far as the data on suicides versus other gun violence. It's very different. We do see that when people commit suicide, they are far more likely to be successful when there is a gun that they have access to. And we also know that removing that gun from their presence actually can lead to a lack of it ever happening. There's this idea that if somebody's suicidal, they are going to be constantly suicidal throughout their lives. And that's actually not accurate. Many people, when they get the proper help and care they need, go on to never have suicidal thoughts again. But the problem is that when they are actually in the throes of committing suicide in the act, if they're able to do it right then and there, they are very likely to succeed when there's a gun, whereas if they are to take pills or something else, they're not as likely to actually carry it out. And so if you could find a way to temporarily remove that from them while they're getting through the throes of that and then restore it later on, like those are valid conversations to have. I don't feel like that's what red flag laws are.
I think that we also have to acknowledge a big difference. Red flag laws at the different state level are written differently. Some of them are very vague, open-ended, and don't have that strong due process protections. Some are better than others. And so I think where I'm at is if I was in a state legislature, and this is the kind of thing where I'm torn on it, so I'm glad I don't have to cast a vote one way or another. I would at least consider voting for a very narrowly tailored, careful legislation enacting this in my state. I would at least give it I'd be open to it because I don't think it's incompatible with supporting the principles of the Second Amendment and self-defense and gun rights. In the same way that you and I don't believe that like the domestic abuser thing is incompatible with that culture. It's people like to say we get mad when people say the Second Amendment is an absolute, but that's actually like true in our system. At least the constitutional rights are never considered absolute. They're only held to strict scrutiny, a legal standard where you must prove this is the most narrowly tailored proposal that you could do. It's addressing a legitimate interest and it's very strict. But there are things, I mean, like, that's why child pornography is not considered covered by the First Amendment. A true absolutist, you could argue that not the creation, but the distribution of child pornography is free speech. That's wrong. I think that's wrong. I think we've clearly not taken that stance on many things, which brings me back to one more point I want to make on this, which is the due process question on the red flag laws. I'm sympathetic to that argument, but I would really say that and this might not mean much to you because you think the whole system is shit. But do you think search warrants violate due process?
If they're obtained with a warrant, no.
Well, you don't get to have a lawyer there. There's no argument against. The prosecutor just goes to the judge, has to provide evidence, and the judge says, is this good enough or not? And if it is, they do it, they search you, and then after the fact, you can seek remedy and have it thrown out if it wasn't legit. That's how red flag laws work. So it's kind of the same thing.
But can you seek remedy? Like, that's the real question here. And I've not seen that protocol laid out in these red flag laws. I haven't seen that system in any way detailed. And right now, the way that I typically see them apply, I really can't point to a state that I think has done it well yet. Let me say it that way. There might be ways to do red flag laws that did honor due process, because I agree with you. Your rights are absolute unless you begin to use them in a way that hurts other people and becomes a threat to other people. And that is the exception. But in order for us to take those rights away in a moral and ethical society, we must meet this standard as a government, as a body of representative government, to actually prove that you have done that or that you actually are a threat in that way before we can take away your rights. So I need to see more tailored, specific kinds of laws under this kind of idea before I could accept them. Because right now, they are so broad that they can and will be used to abuse people. They will certainly be used politically as a weapon. And the fact is, within the justice system, that already happens a lot, with search warrants, with even following the constitutional protocols. We see a ton of abuse by prosecutors and by cops and by judges. Look at the Breonna Taylor case. They had a warrant. Right. You know how they got it? They didn't show jack. I mean, there's already things that they do like this that ultimately get people killed, and that you don't always have recourse. And that recourse is really dependent on, do you have money to hire a good attorney? Are you a prominent person in society who will be believed in the face of the government? Do they not kill you in the process before you get time to go in and actually try to get recourse? So these are serious questions. I don't think we can give them an inch without them taking a mile. And so if we're going to say we need to have these protocols and standards, it has to be so narrow in the language of these bills and so for such a specific amount of time. And there has to be protocols for people to protest and push back on it. All of that would have to be a very precise system that was crafted under these laws. And I don't think they're getting that kind of intentionality at this time.
Yeah, look, I think that's a valid perspective. I want to know what people think. Let us know. Shoot us emails, shoot us comments, subscribe to our locals, and then chat with us there about this. Because this is a live issue. And I'll just point out, a lot of people who say that they're Republicans or conservatives or libertarian, maybe a little less with the libertarians, but who are generally pro-gun rights are open to or supportive of the idea of red flag laws. It's that one issue, and some of them maybe are just selling out, but some of them I think can genuinely just want to try to do something, and it feels like it could address the issue. So I think it's an important debate. We'll put a pin in it there, but I'm glad we talked about it.